Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, let me also recognize distinguished colleagues in the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. But my task today is very, very simple. I have three distinguished panelists. First, Mr. Patrick Gaspard, who is the president of the Open Society Foundation. Please, can you join us on the table? I have Ambassador Jozef Smets. He's the director of Sub-Saharan Africa Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Belgium. Last but not the least is Mr. Solomon Dersso. He's a commissioner in the African Commission on Human and People's Rights based in Banjul, and is also the founder of the Amani Africa based in Addis Ababa. Excellencies, everything has been said. Indeed, I will want you to please admonish our panelists not to thank anyone, to go straight to the point. We've all said it, dramatic changes in the Horn of Africa. The President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia did say that. We are witnessing the wind of change. We are also witnessing the opportunities that can be unleashed. So what is very critical for us today is to look ahead, profile solutions, policy recommendations for the Lake Tana Forum to actually chew and indeed digest through our various mechanisms at the AU, at IGAD, at the UN, and all across our world. But the most important factor is that we are going to be very, very time conscious. We know that because we just had lunch, the youth have energized us with their professionalism and direct response. So we will not speak too much grammar, as we say in Nigeria. We are going to go straight to the point, and I'm very sure that nobody will fall asleep. Excellencies, now, okay. Yes, I indeed also have a fourth speaker, a fourth panelist, His Excellency Abdirahman Yusuf Ali Aynte. Please, sir, join us on the high table. We've all discussed the challenges, the internal vulnerabilities, the displacement, the fragility. Everything has been said. But this panel will be looking at some specificity, and they will profile solutions. Please hold them accountable for them when it comes to policy recommendations. I would like to start with Ambassador, the ambassador from the Kingdom of Belgium. The ambassador from the Kingdom of Belgium represents a country that is currently on the UN Security Council, a founding member of the European Union. Therefore, Ambassador, what opportunities do you see in the Horn, particularly as peace is, the prospects for peace are brighter? We really need to know from you the business orientation, the commercial interest, and investing in people in this part of the world. Over to you, sir.
Un grand merci, Monsieur l'ambassadeur.
Sorry, you have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Alors, voilà. Je vais commencer en français et je vais aussi faire un switch vers l'anglais dans 2 minutes. Alors, je dois faire un timing très strict. Effectivement, ça a été dit, nous sommes ici dans notre capacité de membres non permanents du Conseil de sécurité, ce qui implique que nous sommes très engagés dans tous les débats autour des mandats, des missions de maintien de paix, bien évidemment, mais aussi la grande discussion autour du financement des opérations africaines de maintien de paix. C'est un débat qui est en cours, c'est un débat qui occupe beaucoup les esprits, c'est un débat qui mérite toute notre attention. Nous n'y sommes pas encore, mais je pense que Nous avons la ferme volonté avec d'autres membres du Conseil de sécurité de lancer le débat, de l'alimenter, de le faire avancer. Nous sommes aussi pour le moment président du comité de sanctions sur la Somalie. Ça, c'est encore un aspect, un volet spécial que je voudrais mentionner. Et notre porte d'entrée au niveau du Conseil de sécurité regroupe très clairement pour nous 3 priorités. Bien sûr, la protection, la performance, et cela n'étonne personne, mais aussi la prévention. Et j'ai très bien écouté quand Monsieur le ministre Sezibera hier a parlé du plus grand échec que la communauté internationale a connu parce qu'elle n'a pas su prévenir le génocide contre les Tutsis du Rwanda. Nous étions tous ensemble à Kigali récemment pour encore nous souvenir de cet échec retentissant, terrible. Donc prévention, je pense que c'est un terme qui doit faire partie de ce qu'on fait au Conseil de sécurité. Et très vite, avant d'entrer dans la matière et de continuer en anglais, nous sommes aussi, bien sûr, États membres de l'Union européenne qui a opté pour un partenariat très intense, très fort avec l'Union africaine. D'ailleurs, je salue l'action du représentant spécial de l'Union africaine qui est dans la salle, M. Rondos. Nous avons eu le sommet il y a 2 ans à Abidjan. Et d'ailleurs, Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, lors de ce sommet, nous avions tous dit la jeunesse est prioritaire. Donc j'étais très content avec la session juste avant nous, mais aussi je suis très content de voir que cette jeunesse bouge dans cette région. Il y a des hommes et des femmes politiques très jeunes qui sont à l'œuvre dans ce pays, dans des pays voisins. Il y a au Soudan des mouvements qui sont très forts, qui sont très impressionnants. Donc la jeunesse est là. Et je suis content de dire que aussi chez nous en Europe, la jeunesse bouge. Et chez nous, on a eu, notamment en Belgique ces derniers temps, beaucoup de manifestations qui demandent au gouvernement de prêter plus d'attention sur les changements climatiques. Tout d'un coup, des dizaines de milliers de jeunes belges qui sont dans la rue chaque semaine, tout d'un coup. On pensait qu'ils étaient devenus un peu plus passifs, etc. Mais ce n'est pas du tout le cas, ça nous a réjoui beaucoup. Dans le cadre Union européenne, bien sûr, Union européenne, Union africaine, je tiens de dire que le Conseil Affaires étrangères de l'Union européenne a décidé, a déclaré que la région de la Corne de l'Afrique est une région pour nous prioritaire, stratégique, et notre engagement doit être à long terme, et un engagement qui va parfois très loin. Nous sommes, l'Union européenne octroie, par exemple, une aide budgétaire à la Somalie. C'est un pas qui n'est pas évident, mais qui est la meilleure décision qu'on pourrait prendre. Quelques mots juste sur les pays de la région, si vous me le permettez, parce que c'est toujours un peu délicat de parler ici en tant qu'Européen, et je le fais avec beaucoup de modestie et avec beaucoup d'engagement dans les cadres appropriés. Mais je pense, Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, on n'a pas encore suffisamment ici souligné l'importance de la société civile. Donc je pense que son rôle est d'une très grande importance, et nous pourrions encourager tous les gouvernements de la région. L'Éthiopie l'a fait de façon retentissante. La place complète et totale à cette société civile, et je voudrais aussi ici lancer un appel pour que la présidence égyptienne de l'Union africaine donne le même espace à cette société civile. Alors, je vais conclure avec 2-3 éléments très vite. Je pense que nous devrions, et ça c'est de nouveau nous Européens, regarder aussi de plus en plus vers cette région à travers l'angle de l'économie et du business. Je suis content qu'il y a de plus en plus d'entrepreneurs de nos pays qui trouvent le chemin vers les pays de cette région. Nous voudrions aussi voir que le secteur portuaire de cette région se développe en toute transparence et qu'on œuvre pour une démilitarisation des ports de la région. Et finalement, parce qu'on me demande de conclure, voilà, nous souhaiterions louer le moteur qui est devenu l'Éthiopie dans ces changements, en même temps demander que l'institutionnalisation et la régionalisation, le multilatéralisme dans cette approche soit renforcé. On est ici dans un débat en appui au multilatéral. Et je crois que je vais devoir m'arrêter parce qu'il y a eu des signaux inquiétants de la salle qui étaient sans équivoque. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I would like to call on Solomon to give us his insights into how best, in this age where we can believe and we know that multilateralism is already being attacked front, right, and center, how do we discuss and move ahead when it comes to building stronger regional integration through multilateral actors that we have in the region?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I would like, first of all, to start off by thanking the organizers of Tana Forum once again for putting up a very excellent edition of what has become a premier place to dialogue, discuss, debate, and contemplate solutions for peace and security issues on the African continent. And I do hope that Tana will continue to shine into the future. On the question that you raised, Ambassador, yes, we live in a time, as President Sahle-Work early in the morning described, in a turbulent time. In a time, as President Mahama, in his presentation of the state of peace and security, described, that presents many troubling developments across the globe. And indeed, Ambassador, as you rightly pointed out, in a time when doubts are being expressed about multilateralism from parts of the world, including those who were supposed to be the guardians of multilateralism. So it's indeed a rather daunting task to try to defend multilateralism at a time like this one. But I don't think that multilateralism would require defending any other time than this one, indeed. And here in the Horn of Africa, we have witnessed very incredible change as a result of developments happening within countries because of pressure, particularly that has come about due to the major demographic transformations that are happening within countries, the coming of age of a new generation that is politically conscious and that wishes to take charge of its future, that wishes to see change, governance, systems of governance, and change in its future, in its socio-economic conditions. And we are also witnessing change as a result of the rapprochement that Ethiopia and Eritrea have made and the breaking of 2 decades of no war, no peace, 2 decades of tension that hovered over the region and that made regional integration extremely difficult. And with the lifting of this cloud, the opportunity for regional integration has presented itself for us. And with these regional changes, of course, we have to bring in the global context that have been pointed out earlier on, particularly the big power competition and the competition that's playing itself out on the Horn of Africa by the Gulf countries in particular. Now, in this context, of course, what is it that multilateralism brings to the table? Multilateral institutions such as the African Union, IGAD, as the most immediate regional institution, and going beyond other regional organizations in the neighborhood, such as the League of Arab States, and then globally, of course. Since the global collective security system is anchored on the UN, then the role that the UN plays. I would like to make quick points in terms of what these institutions bring to the table. The first one is these institutions, because of the fact that they are founded on the principles of international law, because they are founded also on inclusive participation and dialogue, I think they present an opportunity for reflecting on and debating, for searching for solutions, for shared problems. They also present principles and rules that support regional initiatives that also institutionalize solutions. They help, in particular, nurture the emergence of leadership. I think it's not going to be easy for these institutions to create the kind of platform that help address the challenge that we are facing in the region. It's not going to be easy because there are big powers and other regional powers that have been engaged and continue to engage on a bilateral basis with countries of the region. There have been practices of transactional approach to peace and security. So one of the challenges that we face accordingly is that of creating a situation whereby those who are seeking to defend their interests through bilateral and transactional approach observe or see that their approach is short-termist, and in the long term, it would be contrary to not only to their own interests, but also to the greater good that this region and indeed the continent is trying to defend and protect. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and for being on time. We have on this panel a former Minister of Planning and International Cooperation of Somalia. He is going to tell us from his practical, personal experience, what are the exact implications for regional integration in this region? How do we move forward? Because we have said in the African Union system that regional integration will be a building block for continental unity, cooperation, and development. From the experience he had as former minister, exactly what steps, what policy recommendations, what policy changes will you recommend to this forum for us to be able to chew at the end of the day? Over to you, former minister.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I also echo my colleagues to thank the organizers of the Tana Forum for this excellent edition, the 8th Forum, and for me it's a privilege to be here the first time. This morning, a lot of speakers, including former president of Ghana and current president of Ethiopia, spoke a lot about the changes that are happening in this region, particularly in Ethiopia, and a lot of adjectives have been used this morning to describe that. Musa Fiki called it a tectonic shift, someone else called it a paradigm shift, and all of that. I do believe, as many of you believe, that it indeed is a dramatic shift, one in a generation that does not happen in this part of the world very often, one that many people in this part of the world have welcomed with a great deal of enthusiasm, and rightfully so. But, you know, as we say in America, where's the beef? And that's where I want to pick up and propose 4 points, if you will, to this discourse. The first point I'd like to raise here is the people in this region, much like the rest of the world, are the beef they would like to see out of this very important change that is taking place in this part of the world today is true democratic governance. So the changes that are leading to rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea are good, but they will not be good enough if they don't ultimately bring about real democratic change. And I mean real democratic change. I'm not referring to elections here. President Mohammed this morning listed 27 elections that have taken place in this continent. But should we be celebrating elections just because they were elections? Regrettably, many times in this part of the world, we do hold a lot of elections that result in 97%, as you all know very well. So I think we should be talking about real democratic change. If you look at the website of Freedom House today and right now, and look at the state of democracy in the world today, but particularly in Africa, and look at the indications of freedom, Regrettably, there are only 2 or 3 green spots in the entire continent of Africa. There is plenty of purple spot, which points to no freedom at all, or not free. And there is a little bit of yellow in this part of the world, which is Kenya. And it's no coincidence that the most prosperous, most stable states around the world, but also in Africa, are the most democratic ones as well. In this part of the world, it's Kenya, and in the broader Africa, it's South Africa. So the first beef that the current change in this part of the world must bring is democratic change. The second one is it must remove barriers to real trade and economic integration in this region. There's a lot of talk of economic integration, and I think that's certainly what people in this part of the world need today. But what does that actually mean when people in this part of the world, in the Horn of Africa, are unable to do the basic cross-trade that they need to? I was mentioning last night to some colleagues, not the most pleasing thing to say, but most of the states in the Horn of Africa are, if you ask, for example, in the case of Somalia, where I come from, our first 3 largest trading partners are not in Africa. They are UAE, Saudi Arabia, and China, and in that order. But we could easily be becoming the largest trading partner with Ethiopia, and we would love to do that. But there are real barriers to that. So that should be the second one. The third beef should be that our multilateral institutions, namely the African Union and IGAD, should be very responsive to people. Here, not being too critical on the African Union or IGAD for that matter, but they should do, at least the perception of most people in Africa today is that they often support regime security as opposed to security of people and security of democratic institutions. And the fourth and final one is that whatever change that is taking place in Africa or in the Horn of Africa must feel and look like that it is organic, not implemented or subsidized by some external actors, which in some cases it can look like. And I think that's a real risk that we face, and we want to make sure that we make it as organic, as local, as responsive as possible to the local people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commander. Very much. I'm sure by the time it's question time, you will find a lot of questions regarding the trade barriers that you mentioned, and we have the Commissioner for Trade and Industry here when it comes to the CFTA. Now, our last panel speaker will be Mr. Patrick. He works for the Open Society Foundation, and we know all that means. They deal with people, they deal with their rights, they deal with opening up the political space. In this region, we have the issues. We've heard a lot about the issues this morning. We've heard a lot about the challenges. And we also know how to build the prospects for peace in the region. But exactly how do you mobilize the people to buy into this peace? How do you mobilize and build community resilience in this perspective based on your experience? Over to you.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador. I'll get right to your question, and I'll say, first of all, the way that one really, in these challenging times, builds resilient institutions and puts a real emphasis on citizenship is by first dispensing with protocol and asking ourselves some incredibly difficult questions. Of course, being here in Bahir Dar, one has to say that Ethiopia gives us hope, but one should hasten to also say that Ethiopia also gives us a warning of what happens if one does not attend to grievances for the long term, but instead hastens to paper over some intense challenges. Those of us who are engaged in the work of rights have to, of course, cheer on every single open window, but we also have to make certain that the opening does not become window dressing. So as we look across the region, the challenges that we have and the attendant opportunities that reside and walk side by side with those challenges, I think that one has to take on immediately the location of citizen engagement, citizen agency within those challenges. Here, in Ethiopia. And if I can, I'd like to just push back just a little bit against the former Minister of Planning. The minister is right to be skeptical and naturally cynical about the outcomes of elections where you have 97% support for incumbent parties, but one should not easily glide past the importance of election integrity in developing mandates that come organically from the ground, from people. Here in Ethiopia, there's an important opportunity in May of next year or beyond if it's slightly delayed to have the personal aspirations of over 100 Ethiopians expressed in a way that gives Prime Minister Dr. Abiy, his party, and opposition parties as well, an opportunity to litigate key critical issues in this republic. That should not be something that we just shrug off easily and readily, particularly in a space where you have right now, today, 1 million Ethiopians who find themselves to be refugees in their own nation as a consequence of ongoing ethno-nationalist conflicts that have been unattended to and that can be litigated in a national conversation around elections. If I look, Ambassador, at the Sudan, where we've described seismic change in the Sudan, yes, there is seismic change, but it is change of an undetermined nature. And there have been at least 2 times in the last many decades where in Sudan, popular uprisings have not cohered into national democratic opportunities. There's been an inability to form a national project of identity, and in that vacuum, political elites have exploited ethnic and regional tensions. So right now, all of us who are excited about what's occurring in the Sudan or concerned about what's occurring in the Sudan should appreciate that we have an immediate responsibility to look at this protest movement, which is incredibly diverse, where you have the shoeshine man side by side with a doctor. We should look at this movement and we should enable them to get the intellectual energy beyond this movement that takes the conversation from just the displacement of military leadership to civilian leadership to the question of what a national project of identity looks like and how one affirmatively addresses the trauma of the last 30 years in a way that brings meaningful redress and creates pathways of access to justice that opens the door for proper governance. We should also ask ourselves another difficult question about this moment of rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea. We need to make absolutely certain that in our exuberance, we also ask ourselves whether or not there continues to be proper pressure being applied on Eritrea, because we have seen that there has been no commensurate opening there, and I know that democracy does not happen overnight, change does not happen overnight. However, when you have sanctions that are being lowered, seemingly without consequence, and you have still no parliament, no constitution, and there continues to be a call for a national service that leads to the flow of young people from that country that has only increased during this period of rapprochement, we must ask ourselves what happened to the UN Commission report on the violence that continues unabated inside of that country. And lastly, Mr. Ambassador, we need to make certain that our multilateral organizations, the AU, IGAD, our regional organizations, our international organizations, are responding in a way that just does not consider the needs of elites, but that is engaging at the grassroots level with civilians in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Eritrea. And we need to make certain that there is an insistence, an absolute insistence on the regional human rights norms that continue, regrettably, to be violated, even in this profound, powerful moment of rapprochement.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Indeed, I think you heard from a panelist. I've been told that we must make this interactive. So I'm really going to bring the mic to you, apart from our excellencies, but others will need to speak. We are witnessing a new era, definitely in interstate engagements in the Horn. That is not debatable. However, what exactly are the implications for regional integration? The African Union thrives itself on moving forward with regional integration. And I come from a country in West Africa where we mean business when we talk of regional integration. But we need to also do more. We need to learn lessons from other countries. In the days of President Mbeki, they set up the tripartite arrangement with EAC, with SADC, and COMESA, because they wanted to share lessons. What lessons can we give to this region? How can we revitalize IGAD itself in a way that it becomes a true champion for regional integration? Over to you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Lunch? Change doors? Yes. Yes, please. The lady in blue.
Thank you, Ambassador, Your Excellencies. My name is Chieng Akana. I am the Executive Director for the Pan-African Citizens Network, which is a civil society organization. I'm really pleased to hear the panel speak a lot about the people. I feel that that's an element that could have been better explored in the previous panel on prospects. Because the people can either be drivers of conflict, but they can also be drivers of peace processes. And I'd be curious to hear from you if there are any lessons we could learn from more local peace actions. We know that there are communities, particularly, for example, cross-border communities that have entered into peace negotiations that have not required large intergovernmental intervention. They found ways to talk and live better together, and how can those organically grown peace processes be multiplied at a regional level? I'd be curious to know if that is possible and how that would work.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can we have the other speaker there?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm representing COMESA to the African Union. In the way, Moderator, you are speaking, I cannot not really, avoid to speak one way. I admire the former Minister of Planning of Somalia, and in my view, he has really told us what we should do as a group. As a group, to mean, I think when people talk of IGAD reform, personally, I can say that IGAD has done a lot in peace and security. But as the former minister said, I think IGAD can go now into governance to consolidate what they have done in peace and security in this region. Now, of course, the former minister also mentioned trade. You can't imagine that I was so proud to hear that, because as far as trade is concerned, this region can benefit from the acquis of COMESA and the tripartite, as somebody has mentioned it. Now, lastly, I think, honestly speaking, this region needs also a transfer of skills from all over Africa. But more importantly, I think the Gulf countries, the European countries, or the Western countries, not Western only, but the whole rest of the world can invest more and more in infrastructure, energy, and the skills development. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, do we have more questions? We have time? Yes, please.
Thank you, Moderator and panel. I just have a quick and simple question. Can there be regional integration in the presence of irredentist claims on neighbors' territories?
Thank you very much. I believe that this panel will do justice to these questions. I will not go specifically to each one. I will just have a new round. And I would like to start with Solomon. The first question is about investing in the people at the grassroots level to actually be part of the peace process. And I think that's what we have witnessed. Nigeria serves effectively in the Peace and Security Council, and I can tell you that we've undertaken field missions to trouble spots. But the people we meet in camps, we've not discussed much today about the theme of the year, durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa. The plight of our refugees, of our IDPs and returnees is mind-boggling. We really need to address that because sometimes we make peace so abstract and so academic that the people on the ground do really not feel the peace. And I think that's what our first question is all about. The second question deals with IGAD reform itself. How are we going to reposition IGAD, knowing the leadership role that Ethiopia has played, knowing the leadership role that all members of IGAD have played, and the overlap with East African community? How do we do that? And of course, the question that deals with trade barriers. And I'm going to ask the Commissioner for Trade and Investment later on to weigh in on this issue. Mr. Salvador also ensured that he asked the question back to the former minister about skills transfer and global investment. We cannot talk about regional integration without infrastructure. We are dreaming. It's one factor that we did not hear so much today. You cannot talk about Europe is a model that we really need to really look up to and build on and make it African. And I think that's the question about global investment and, of course, the skills transfer. And the last one, I really didn't get the question well, but I'm sure that my panelists got it. So over to you, Solomon. You have a mouthful.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think if we, for example, take the last question about whether or not integration would be possible in an environment where there are territorial claims, irredentist activities. So the question, in other words, is a question about what are the prerequisites that we need to have in place, including in terms of the countries in the region in putting their house in order, so to speak, before we actually talk about regional integration. I think a lot has been said already about some of the prerequisites for regional integration, as Abdi spoke about, and Patrick as well, in terms of what needs to happen at the national level. But I think, given the complexity of the challenge that we are facing in the region, I'm not really sure that we can put the integration process on hold until all the prerequisites for integration are put in place. So as we work on the challenge of territorial claims and irredentism, we need also, side by side to that, to work on the process of integration. Because whether we like it or not, the developments in the world will not wait until such time that we have fully and effectively resolved the issues that create hindrance for the process of integration. So we have to identify spots from the wide spectrum of issues of integration on which we open the opportunities for broader integration, including for resolving these issues of territorial claims and irredentism. It's only when we create that sense of togetherness, that sense of we rise or fall as a unit, that people will surrender this idea of irredentism, this idea of territorial claim. For that, we need to create all the opportunities and the possibilities and to seize all those avenues of regional integration. And the opportunities that we now have basically need to be seized by institutionalizing them, of course, by answering the tough questions that have been raised. Let me stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Solomon. Indeed, we've forgotten about what you can call the contagion effect. Eritrea and Ethiopia started this journey. But of course, it has really reached Djibouti and Eritrea. It has reached Eritrea and Somalia. And I think that is the sense of togetherness he's talking of. When ECOWAS was founded in 1975, it was a sense of togetherness. Though one of the most diverse set of countries, 15, 16 countries with 3, 4, 5 different official languages. But today, they are on the march, like SADC, like EAC. How do we bring IGAD to that level? But let me go back to Patrick to give us insights. How do we bring local people to own the peace process?
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was, I thought, a wonderful question from our sister. I'll tell you that before coming here, some weeks ago, I was in Sri Lanka, and I was there right before the horrific Easter Day bombings. And I was there because I was in conversation with local communities who, following the civil conflict in Sri Lanka, decided that they were going to find ways to indigenize the peace process and to indigenize justice, and to bring the conversation from the federal level to a way that was bespoke in their own particular communities, that spoke to the DNA of their constituency and of the evident needs on the ground. So they just found ways to take the conversation from one that was in a way wholesale to retail on justice. Here in Ethiopia, a number of days ago, I was engaging with students at Addis Ababa University, and they asked the very same question, and we talked about ways that we as our foundation could begin to make investments in conversations at the community level around ethno-nationalist conflicts. But beyond that, we understood that it is next to near impossible to have conditions for peace if one is also not creating conditions for economic inclusion. Those two things must march side by side, or eventually beyond a transition, one will find yourself in a competition between workers for meager opportunities that can then be exploited through ethno-nationalist tensions. So the need to indigenize those conversations is vital and present here in this country. But I want to add one more thing, because there was another questioner who talked about the need for investments in the region. Yes, there's a need for investment, but I hope that as you take up the need for foreign direct investment, that your multilateral institutions, your bilateral governments will be asking and your civil society, an engaged civil society, will be asking some very difficult questions about those investments. We know that right now in the Horn, the Gulf region is heavily invested and involved, and we should appreciate, and our citizens should, that the Horn has long been a source of cheap labor for the Gulf. And through that cheap labor, they've been able to identify construction workers and domestic workers who go to the Gulf, and then there are attendant problems with irregular migration and the exploitation of those very workers. So there must be a question and a conversation about protections during investment as well. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the ambassador from Belgium and for our partners in Europe. But I'm sure the ambassador would agree with me that in this moment of investment, one should step back and appreciate why certain investments are being made and what the agenda of those who are investing, what agenda do they have? We know, for instance, as we talk about this moment of transformation and change that everyone's cheering on in the Gulf, we know that the European Union made a set of investments here in the Horn because of their chief and principal concern about migration flows. And through those investments, they managed to resource some of the very authoritarians and security state actors who have been creating more repression in the region. So those are some of the tough questions that I hope we'll ask as we cheer on foreign direct investment.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Indeed, when we're talking of investments, not just foreign direct investments, intra-African investment is also very, very ideal. Responsible, culturally friendly, and it will be the best for the continent and indeed for this region we're talking about. Over to you, former minister.
Thank you. I'll just respond to two points that have been asked by colleagues. This was a question relating to the reform on IGAD or African Union, or another question relating to trade. And here I want to be provocative again to the audience. Look, I think we have to ask ourselves a number of questions. First question is, when we talk about, for example, regional integration, or we talk about economic integration, are we talking about integration of leaders or synergy of their views, or we're talking about systems and processes and value integration? I think we in Africa need to ask that question very well. Let's use some examples here. The example of European Union, for example. European Union is not a bunch of leaders who agreed on something. It's a value system that ultimately created a sustainable model of cooperation among states, both on politics, on security, and on trade. And it's largely working. It's imperfect for all the reasons we know, including what's going on with Brexit right now. But if we're talking about multilateral institutions here in the Horn of Africa, particularly IGAD or the African Union, I think we first need, before we even talk about economic integration or regional integration, we need to talk about the systems with which we need to integrate. Because if you have individual leaders who like each other at a particular moment in time, that simply will not be stable, sustainable when these 2 or 3 or 4 leaders leave power. That's why when you talk about integration, you need to think about things like ratifications of whatever that has been agreed by national parliaments. Patrick, you just mentioned that Eritrea doesn't even have a parliament to speak of. So who is going to ratify some of these issues that we're talking about? That's a question for everyone, not for me. You know, a few months ago, I was involved in a benchmarking exercise that talked about what freedom in Africa, especially in the Horn of Africa, would look like. And it was an exercise by a number of scholars who got together to think about this very hard. And one of the points that I raised there was, I said, you know, a simple, fundamental benchmark for me would be to see former African leaders living in their own country peacefully. That's a simple indication for me. If that can happen, that country is actually doing really well. Of course, that's happening in a lot of countries, but not in many African countries. We know that very well. So I'm not, I cannot say enough about the emphasis here on the importance of creating systems and institutions. And just a quick point on the issue of skills transfer. Again, I would push back on this point and say that what we need in Africa, in the Horn of Africa, is systems and values transfer, not necessarily skills transfer. I believe a lot of people in Africa, especially from where I come from, Somalia now, you would be impressed with the number of skills that are available. The question is, are we bringing the value systems that we need to bring about peace, stability, trade, and that type of a question? So we need to think along those lines. And on the question of irredentism, I'm not sure what the reference there is. I do not know, at least in the Horn of Africa now, an overt, open claim of one country to other countries' claims. Of course, there remains... Well, that is now being settled, but that's not necessarily an irredentist. I think the reference is broadly used in the Somali context with respect to Ethiopia, and as many of you would know here, Somalia is not now openly or actively laying any claim on any territory of Ethiopia. That just is the 60s and 70s business. It's not happening anymore.
Thank you very much, former minister. I think you deserve a... Yeah. Ambassador Joseph, you have the last say.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe a reaction on that first very interesting question on how can popular So how can popular dynamics change things? Let me just give you an example of what is going on now in Europe. It has been mentioned that there are populist political parties. We have elections, European elections this month, by the way, the 26th of May, coupled with national elections in Belgium. So you have parties who try to capitulate on irregular migration as being the problem of the day. And it is so beautiful to see, and I think I said it in my first intervention, that a lot of young people now, what do? They go on the street to attract the attention of our political class to climate change and to the need, the necessity to be very more ambitious on climate change. So this is how young people say, listen, we have other things to do than to talk about migration. Secondly, on economy, investment, and trade, I would like here just to say that are ongoing for the moment negotiations on the post-Cotonou agreement, which is quite an important framework, where market access, trade, investment are involved. The negotiations are due to be closed towards the end of the year. And in the new constellation, the African pillar will become a very important one. So it was EU ACP, now we go for EU to A plus C plus P. So that is a very important thing to look at when you talk about that. So the private pillar, the private sector dimension, we have to encourage it in all our programs because I think this is a unifying, it has an important effect on the region. And I think that also governments should, as much as they can, adopt national plans on business and human rights. Very important, because we also have to see if the companies that are active abroad are into transparent, clean business. That's our responsibility. When you talk about corruption, transparency, gold sector, natural resources, we have to watch our companies. And by launching such a national plan, my government at least tries to do that, and there is a direct link with the justice sector. And last element on territorial claims. I'm not the one who is going to talk really about it, but I would like to seize this opportunity to plead when we talk about Somalia, and my country is a federal state. We have some experience with that. It's not an easy thing, a federal state, but it is an interesting thing. So that Somalia gets all the chance to have a loyal federal state, a strong federal state, whereby the entities, the federal entities, show loyalty to the federal level. And I think that the countries in the region, and now also looking in the direction of the Gulf states, should not disturb this process. It is so important that you don't transfer regional tensions to the new Somalia, and that federal state gets a chance now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I would like to call on two people from the floor. We are going to sum up rightly, but we need to call on the ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt, the country that is currently chairing the African Union. Ambassador, you have the floor. 2 minutes, please. And the Commissioner for Trade and Industry should also get ready.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bankole, for availing me that opportunity. A wonderful discussion and so on. I want just to build on the very brilliant last remark by the distinguished Somali minister when he spoke about streamlining and harmonizing policies and processes and so on. This is the benchmark and the key word to succeed on the issue of regional integration. We need to do justice to ourselves. We're just embarking nowadays. In the 8th of July in Niamey, we will have the first coordination meeting, the mini summit, where REX will sit down on a table trying to benefit. And Ambassador Bankole, you were in Tunis and in Cairo when we started doing the homework and so on, how to do that division of labor, subsidiarity. To put that into a test, the benchmarking issues and the processes is the key word. And I would tend to believe that one major difference between the African Union and the European Union, the African Union, we started as a political organization that strives to be an economic organization as well, while the European Union did it vice versa, and it took them decades to do so. So we need to bear in mind that we could not do it all in Niamey in the 8th of July. One step at a time, gradually, surely, and so on, streamlining. The AFCFTA, I knew that the Commissioner will take the floor, will be put to a test, Ambassador Bankole, on the 29th of May, when an exporter from country X would go trying to have access to country B. If the border is not well equipped with the instructions, the process, and the technicalities and so on, we don't want to fall into the trap of feeling it's a fait accompli. No, we need to keep working on the technicalities and so on, because sometimes we in Africa, we're over emotional and so on, and I would personally say that we're over ambitious. We need to be practical, gradual, pragmatic, borrow experience from the European Union and elsewhere. But I do thank you very much for
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Commissioner, you have the floor. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I think the first point I'd like to make is that the African Continental Free Trade Area legally comes into force, the agreement, on 30th May this year, which is this month. But operations will start after the launch. The launch is going to be on the 7th July by the heads of state and government. Now, the other point I would like to make is that we welcome the involvement of regional economic communities on programs of peace and security. It's very important that we strengthen those programs at the regional level, because they make it much easier to undertake the process of economic integration. Now, the foundation for economic integration in Africa is the Abuja Treaty establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was signed in 1991 and ratified in 1994. And through that, we encourage the formation of new regional economic communities and strengthening of other regional economic communities. And over time, we recognize 8 of them, and IGAD is one of those recognized as the regional economic communities of the African Union. Then we moved a step further in 2012. We came up with the action plan on boosting intra-African trade. And part of that process was to come up with the idea of creating the African Continental Free Trade Area. We started the process in 2015, and regional economic communities were made part of the process in the negotiation processes, and they still continue to do that. As to the question of rationalization, it will come when we have the African Customs Union. At that time, we're going to have a common external tariff, and therefore we have to look at the institutions and the programs of the regional economic communities. But in anticipation of that, the theme for the 2020 State of African Economic Integration report is going to be on rationalization of regional economic communities. It's going to be on the agenda so that we start the discussion of harmonization. I say that I'm overboard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Indeed, the ambition in the Continental Free Trade Area is a reflection of the political will. Now we have to demonstrate practically, when it becomes operationalized, whether we have that will to go the mile, the full hog. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from this distinguished panelist. But let me just close. I'm not going to summarize, because that's the job of Brian. He will come and summarize his jokes, because he can summarize his jokes. I will not do that. But I wanted to really point out 3 factors. First is that leadership is peace in itself, and peace is leadership. We would not have been here today speaking about the political dynamics in the Horn of Africa if 2 leaders did not decide that it was high time they made peace. So peace is about leadership, whatever we say. And that leadership will take us further into integration. And that integration, we believe, will lead to prosperity. The second point is that indeed our leaders worldwide, on the continent, have long realized what our colleague on that side talked about, the redentist movements and all that, that the first sustainable condition for development and prosperity, I'm talking of the 5 founding leaders of NEPAD, is peace and democracy. That is the pathway for us to change the dynamics. The second part is that how do we support this peace process? And that is where IGAD comes in. That is where the UN comes in. And that's where the African Union will play a lead role. How do we ensure that we, at this level, continue with that multilateral talk? Not only the talk, but also the work. It is also important for us to realize that whenever we are speaking in the global regional platforms, we speak a lot about regional integration. But when you go on the ground, the challenges nationally really sometimes tend to relegate to the background issues of regional integration. But what we say in NEPAD before and now is that some of our national solutions can be through regional integration. And I think that is a very important factor for us to take away. Finally, the only way we can sustain this peace in this region, on our continent, and globally is that it must all be inclusive. And that relates to the question about people-centered peace process. That is the way the wind of change will not blow the people away. I really want to thank you for this opportunity. And please, a round of applause to our distinguished panelists. Please don't mind us. We try to make it gender sensitive, gender balanced, but the only panelist, that lady, did not show up. Over to you, Mr. Joke.
I think let's give them a pom-pom again, you know. President Zudi, President Mahama, President Becky, Ambassador Bankole gave me permission. I had committed not to do it, but now that the ambassador has given me permission, I'm operating under diplomatic immunity. And please, I beg those of you from Southern Africa not to, you know Chatham House rules. What we say here, you are not supposed to go and repeat elsewhere. In Zimbabwe, the issue of migration was dramatized by two thieves. At the peak of the crisis, thieves started desecrating graves and stealing coffins. And so one day they were carrying a coffin from a gravesite, having emptied the contents, and they were walking away, and a policeman tried to stop them and said, "Hey, you stop." And then they didn't look at the policeman. They simply said, "You know, they had buried us in the wrong place, so we are now migrating to a better cemetery." And those of you who know the relationship between black man and death will know it is the policeman that ran and not the thief. The real challenge in talking about peace and security is of course what is promised and what's not. I told you 3 years ago that a politician decided to die and then went to whatever place people go in between forms of judgment. Some call it hell and some heaven. But they then met a celestial being who asked the politician, "Look, contrary to what you were told on the earth, here we have free choice. So you are free to sample the two places that you heard about and then afterwards make a choice, whether you go to hell or to heaven." So the celestial being said, "Where do you want to start?" He said, "Oh, let me start in hell." So he was going through hell and then met a gentleman who was dressed in a very fine suit. Because you're ambassadors, I will not liken the suit to anyone in this room, but the suit was very fine. And the celestial being said, the being he met said, "Hi, my name is Lou, full name Lucifer, but you can call me Set." And he said, "Look, here we have rules. We don't drive cheap cars, we don't drink cheap drinks, and we don't restrain our appetites for fun and for enjoyment." You can imagine that for a couple of weeks, which was 2 in particular, he was smoking the finest cheroots, drinking the finest single malt whiskey you can ever think about, and engaging in all manner of activities that are improper to talk about before Ramadan, right? And then after the 2 weeks, he then went up, and then they said, "Well, do you want to check the other place out?" They said, "Yes." So they went to the other place, and it was a bit somber, such as you would experience in a session after lunch, like we are doing. I know that you were not sleeping, Excellencies. You were deeply reflecting, looking at your eyelids, but that is okay, because you know wisdom sometimes does not need to be bright-eyed. So what then happened is that he was there for 2 weeks and he got totally bored. Everything was there. There were mansions, streets of gold, and so on and so forth. And then came back and they said, so have you elected where you want to spend eternity? I said, oh, of course. I said, where? He said, of course, the place downstairs. It was fun because they had all sorts of genres of music, all sorts of fun. But as he was descending down the stairs, met the other gentleman who was no longer wearing a suit, but now carrying a fork and he tried to greet him in the same informality. I say, hi, Lou, my name is, my friend, now here, you are my prisoner, eh? We are not equal. You don't call me by first name. You call me Excellency. Eh? You respect protocol. And he immediately ordered his lieutenants, can you arrest this one and take him? They had prepared the fire 10 times more because they said foolishness must be rewarded. And then he says, but Lou, I was here just 2 weeks ago. He says, Mr. Politician, that was campaign phase. This is reality. I am mindful that in the context of Tana, we have informality, but we are preparing to end. Please don't be informal outside the door. Eh? Remember that. But in the discussions that we're going to have next, we've looked at regional integration. We now want to look at migration. I told you that because I wanted to suggest to you that after consulting myself and President, you know, I visited one African president with the late Tajuddin Abdirahman. We were kept waiting. They said the president was in cabinet session. And then after about 2-3 hours, Tajuddin was a very restless and reckless character. God rest his soul. And then we discovered the president was sitting in the garden by himself. And then asked the ADC, but he's by himself. You said he was in cabinet session. Say, yeah, he's the Minister of Finance, Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs. So he had to consult himself in his many portfolios. I also engaged in that consultation of self because it is a virtue in Africa that after many centuries of lacking self-confidence because of slavery, imperialism, colonialism, neo-colonialism, and so on and so forth, you have to assert your self-confidence. So in my own self-confidence, irrespective of the fact that I'm talking to ambassadors and excellencies, I concluded, having consulted myself, that instead of taking tea break now, we would proceed into the next session and then take tea break and only come back to close down. And I knew that you would be in agreement, but if you are in disagreement, I wish to apologize to you in advance. I'll do this apology most passionately during the tea break, Your Excellencies. But for purposes of progress and peace and stability in the Horn, for now we will do as I have agreed with you and myself. But I'll ask for one small thing that I saw some of you, you've been sitting for a long time. Please do stand just to stretch. And I will ask a representative from Somalia to give us one word in Somali culture that describes either what I have done or that describes what we're about to do in talking about migration in Africa.